Hello and welcome again to another edition of Teaching English is Fun. Today I figured we'll talk about appropriate subjects for small talk. Now, what is small talk? Small talk is things that we use when we first meet somebody. If we're good friends, we can talk about deep subjects. But if you just meet someone, you want to try to begin with something light, something easy to talk about. So one of the problems is that a lot of times we don't know what is appropriate, what's not appropriate to talk about. So here's some appropriate subjects for small talk. I have right here on my page, by the way, you can follow along right here if you go to teachinenglishisfun.com. I'll also put a link to this actual page in the show notes right here. And my name is Jim, and I'm just going to go through what I have on my page, maybe fill it out a little bit, and hopefully give you a little more information. So this is a list of common small talk subjects. Now, if you have difficulty speaking about any of these topics, try to improve your vocabulary by using resources available to you. For example, internet, magazines, teachers at school, wherever you are, right? And if you have any friends that you have that speak English, you can also ask them the same thing. So first thing right here, this is maybe an appropriate subject, sports, right? And you can talk about current matches, you can talk about games, you can talk about your favorite teams. I know over in Korea, a big subject was soccer. Everybody loves soccer, especially when World Cup was hosted in Korea. You could not go wrong by starting off a conversation talking about soccer. Everybody loved to talk about that. So, but there's a saying in Korea, though. They said it's one thing that girls hate worse than guys talking about being in the military or guys talking about soccer is guys talking about playing soccer while in the military. That's a joke they have. So anyway, but that's the subject. Now, hobbies, right? If you have something that you like doing, like for example, myself, I like playing the ukulele or like rock climbing. If you have those kind of things, those are great subjects for small talk, right? And it's something easy for you to talk about because you like doing it, and it's something that can kind of begin a conversation with somebody, right? And you can find out a little bit about themselves, maybe, finding out what they like and things that they like to do. And then the weather. Weather is very boring, but it can get the ball rolling. So it looks very rainy today. Yes, it does. But that can actually start, it can be an icebreaker, we can say, right? You can start a conversation with that. Or, wow, I love this weather. It's amazing, isn't it? And, so beats last week. Last week was so cold. And, something like that can just get the ball rolling. Get the ball rolling means, you kind of get something started, right? So family. Now, general questions about families, not questions about private matters. If somebody's having marital problems or they're getting divorced or their parents are getting divorced, you don't want to ask about that stuff, of course. But maybe, just general questions, right, about, how are the wife and kids, right? And those are common questions that people talk about a lot. Media, any kind of films, books, magazines, those kind of things. You could talk about things that right? So, have you read that new book? It was really great. It's the story is so interesting, right? Or did you see the new movie that came out? It's not quite as good as the book, but they did a pretty good job, right? For example, and then holidays, where, when, those kind of things. Where did you go for vacation? How much did you spend? Now, sorry, that's something you don't want to talk about, not how much. Notice I emphasize the not there on my page, right? We don't want to talk about money at all, right? And whenever you're talking about something, you really don't want to do that. Now, you could bring up the subject if someone talks about something. You might want to ask a little bit about that, but generally we don't talk about that. If you ask about it, it could seem like in poor taste, and if you talk about how much money you spent, that could also seem like you're bragging almost, right? And then hometown. So where do you come from? How is it different or similar from whatever town we're in right now? So if I'm in Lynchburg right now, for example, maybe I'm talking to someone who just came from Seoul, South Korea. I can ask them, oh wow, so how does Seoul compare to Lynchburg, right? And they'll proceed to tell me how there's basically no public transportation in Lynchburg, and Seoul had awesome public transportation. But there's a lot of more elbow room here. So, all right, and then job. Once again, general questions, not too specific. You can ask about like what they do, where they work, but we don't want to ask about their salary, that kind of stuff. That's not good things. So, latest fashion and trends. So you can talk about those things. I know girls like talking about that. Actually, guys normally don't like talking about that a lot, but yeah, it's funny. I've worked with a lot of guys, and then recently I've got a couple of female coworkers, and it's so interesting. They're listening to their conversations with other people is very different from the guys that I know, right? They're like, oh, I love those boots. Where'd you get those? And they'll go through and talk about that. And then celebrities, right? Everybody loves to talk about celebrities. So you can talk about Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, whatever. Did you hear Tom Cruise had to cancel filming of the latest Mission Impossible thing because of the coronavirus in Italy? Shocking, right? And, it can lead to some discussion. Of course, so coronavirus is probably not a very light subject. So now here is a list of topics that probably aren't very good for small talk. Of course, if you're meeting a close friend, these topics may be excellent. Just remember that small talk is generally discussion with people you don't know very well, right? So salary, right? How much do you make? That's none of your business, right? It's really not a good question to ask. Now, you can ask, and this is something people have asked me before, because I've had people come up and say, oh, you are a teacher, you must be rich, which is not really true, but they think that, right? So you can say, for example, how much does a beginning teacher usually make, right? Like for myself, I was teaching over 20 years, so I make a lot more than a beginning teacher, than a brand new teacher. So I can say, well, a beginning teacher makes this much, but I've been teaching for the last 20 years, right? So it's a way to kind of talk about salary, and like maybe, you're a college student or you're interested in that field of work. So you're thinking about getting in there, how much does someone usually make, right? So if somebody asks me my salary point blank, right, a lot of times to look at them and go, well, that's a very rude question. What I do is I tell them, well, this kind of position usually makes between this much and this much, right? But I don't say my exact salary, what I make. And depending on where you work, you're not supposed to talk about your salary. If you're working at the same company and you talk about your salary, you can get fired if you do that in America. So just so you know that. All right, and then politics, right? Politics, you should wait to get to know the person better. I know I was one of the few people on one side the last place I worked, so I had a lot of enemies because I love to talk about politics. But I learned not to talk about politics because all my coworkers were against me, right? So anyway, yeah, and that's why I normally will not talk about anything with that when I'm doing a podcast or I'm doing a video cast because of that. Because I know that's probably not a subject to do, right? Either you make a really good friend or you could make an enemy. So you have to be very careful. If you just get to know the person better before you start talking about things. And then intimate relationships, only for you and your partner, right? Or maybe sometimes people talk with their best friend. But so intimate relationship, meaning, like sometimes we say we don't kiss and tell, right? A gentleman does not kiss and tell. You could also say a lady does not kiss and tell if you're a lady out there. So those are some things we can talk about with that. And then religion, right? Notice tolerance is the key. Yeah, religion actually I'm working at a Christian area right now, and I know some people believe, that they should, spread religion on. But if you're just meeting someone, you should be careful because it's depending on the person. I've had, in fact, in my own classes, I've had fights between Buddhists and Christians talking about religion, getting angry, right? So you don't want to make someone angry at first, and it's better, if you want to mention that or if you want to talk about that, you can gradually go into that. Actually, the area where I am. It's a big Christian area, so almost everybody, the first question they ask is, which church do you go to? Because there's so many churches around this area. So, but anyway, but that's something that you probably should wait until you get to know someone better before you talk about that. And then death. Now, we need to face it, but not the first time we meet someone new. So first time you meet someone new, even though, it's a kind of it is a hot topic these days, but maybe I wouldn't talk about corona or something horrible or about people dying and something. That's probably not a good thing to talk about when you first meet someone. All right, and then financial things, financial related to salary, right? Most people prefer to keep their financial information to themselves, and they don't like to talk about it. Now there are people who may like to talk about things. They like to brag about how much something is, but again, if you're on that other side, if you're talking about, oh yeah, my $2,000 wristwatch, right, and you're bragging about that, well, that's just going to turn people off, right? So it's not, on both sides, it's probably not good. And then finally, sales, right? Don't try to sell something to someone you have just met. And now, of course, Christianity and sales, I know there are people, their job is a missionary, right? Their job is to go out and to get people, to join their church, right? And to tell people about the religion. And I understand that, right? And so we can do that. But that's okay. You can always do those things later anyway. Just wait, to do that. And the same thing with sales. All right, and then that is basically that, right? So just a quick addition to this, right? In addition to what I have on here, if you are a teacher out there, I have another class called Follow-Ups in Conversation on my site here. And I'm going to go over that probably in another video coming up here. And it will beef up the small talk, give you more things to talk about. So after you guys have gone over this content in small groups, you can pair off, right? It's kind of nice to sometimes have a role play almost for class. Now, if you're a student out there, I would suggest maybe, practicing some of these topics with your friends. And, well, it looks like that is all I have time for right now. I have got to run. My daughter my wife had just drove up to pick me up at work, and my daughter needs to go to the bathroom. So it's a weird way to end, but I have to end right there. So I will talk to you all later. Thank you very much.